In the summer of 480 BCE, the sun bore down upon the rugged pass of Thermopylae, a narrow corridor wedged between the Aegean Sea and the towering cliffs of Mount Kallidromos. Here, at a place known as the Hot Gates, a confrontation was set to unfold, one that would resonate through the annals of history. To the north, the earth trembled beneath the march of an empire. Xerxes I, ruler of the vast Persian dominion, had assembled an army the likes of which the Greek world had never seen. By some accounts, it numbered in the hundreds of thousands, drawn from every corner of the empire: Bactrians from the east, Scythians from the northern steppes, Egyptians from the banks of the Nile. Their purpose was clear: to avenge the Persian defeat at Marathon and to break the defiant spirit of the independent Greek city-states. To the south, the Greek world stood fractured. The city-states, never truly united, bickered over strategy, leadership, and their own survival. Yet, despite their divisions, they understood that the Persian advance could not go unchallenged. A contingent of warriors, led by King Leonidas of Sparta, made their way north. They would make their stand at Thermopylae, where the terrain would nullify Persian numbers and force the invaders into a brutal, narrow engagement. The decision to fight here was no accident. Thermopylae was not just a pass. It was a natural fortress. The narrow strip of land between the mountains and the sea left no room for the maneuvering of a massive army. What should have been an overwhelming force would be reduced to fighting in tight formations, unable to encircle or outflank the defenders. This was precisely what Leonidas and his men intended. The Spartan king did not march alone. Alongside him were 300 of his finest warriors, all chosen for their experience and all fathers of sons, ensuring that their bloodlines would continue, even if they fell. But they were not the only Greeks to take up arms. Several thousand hoplites from other city-states, including Thespians and Thebans, had also answered the call. Though vastly outnumbered, these men had come not as conscripts, but as volunteers, each knowing the likelihood of their fate. Across the Gulf of Malice, Persian scouts observed the Greek preparations. Xerxes himself, from his golden throne, watched with confidence. He had been assured of victory. No force could hope to withstand the might of the empire. Yet, as the first volleys of arrows darkened the sky and the Persian soldiers pressed forward into the pass, the scale of what they were about to face would become brutally clear. Darius I, former ruler of the Persian Empire, had watched in outrage as his forces fell to the Greeks at the Battle of Marathon in 490 BCE. What was meant to be a punitive expedition against Athens and Eretria had ended in humiliation. The empire, accustomed to swift conquests from the Indus to the Aegean, had been challenged by a handful of city-states. Retribution was inevitable. But before he could mount a second campaign, Darius died, leaving the throne to his son, Xerxes I. Xerxes did not inherit an empire in decline. On the contrary, Persia remained the most formidable power of its time. Its military machine was vast, its wealth immeasurable, its reach spanning continents. Yet the defeat at Marathon had left a stain on its prestige. For the great king, this was more than a campaign. It was a matter of imperial authority. The Greek world had to be made to understand that defiance came at a cost. For years, preparations unfolded on a scale unprecedented in Persian warfare. Engineers set to work constructing supply depots along the empire's western frontiers. A canal was carved through the Athos Peninsula to prevent the kind of naval disaster that had doomed a previous Persian fleet. Pontoon bridges, vast floating roadways, were thrown across the Hellespont, binding Asia to Europe. The mobilization of manpower stretched across the empire, drawing soldiers from as far as Egypt, Mesopotamia, and the eastern satrapies. By the spring of 480 BCE, the army was ready. Ancient sources, prone to exaggeration, spoke of millions. Modern estimates reduce this to a fraction of that number, but still a force large enough to require a logistical effort beyond anything the Greek world had ever faced. The fleet, numbering hundreds of warships, moved alongside the army, ensuring supplies could be transported by sea. As Xerxes led his forces westward, Emissaries were dispatched ahead, demanding earth and water, the symbolic tokens of submission. Most Greek cities complied. Only a few did not. Athens, still standing defiantly after Marathon, refused. Sparta, the martial powerhouse of the Peloponnesus, killed the Persian envoys outright. Their defiance meant war. Among the Greeks, the response was slow and uncertain. The city-states, fiercely independent and prone to infighting, struggled to present a unified front. Yet, even in their disunity, they understood what was at stake. The Hellenic League was formed, a fragile alliance of polities determined to resist Persian domination. A strategy was devised. The vast Persian army could not be stopped in the open field. Instead, it would be delayed, forced into narrow passes where its numbers would count for little. That place was Thermopylae. Leonidas I, the king of Sparta, was not supposed to rule. Born into the Aegeid dynasty, he was a younger son, overshadowed by his half-brother Cleomenes. Only through a series of political missteps and internal turmoil did he ascend to the throne. But unlike many kings of Sparta, Leonidas was no stranger to the brutal training of the Agoge. He had endured the same trials as any Spartan warrior, forged in the discipline of the phalanx, hardened by years of military service. By the time the Persian threat loomed over Greece, Leonidas was already an experienced commander. His decision to march to Thermopylae was not an act of defiance against the Persian Empire alone. It was an assertion of Spartan law. He had been selected to lead the expedition by the Ephors, the powerful overseers of Sparta's political system. His force, 300 men strong, was chosen with deliberate precision. Each warrior was a father, ensuring that their bloodline would survive even if they did not return. Xerxes I, on the other hand, ruled the largest empire the world had ever known. His title was Shahanshah, the King of Kings, a title not of arrogance but of political reality. He commanded satraps, governors, and armies drawn from the farthest reaches of his dominion. His rule was absolute, inherited from Darius, who had expanded the empire's borders beyond those of any predecessor. But he was also untested in war. Unlike his father, who had risen to power through a coup and secured his reign through relentless campaigns, Xerxes had inherited an empire already at its zenith. His decision to invade Greece was driven by both vengeance and pragmatism. Marathon had been a stain on Persian prestige. The failure of his father to bring the Greeks to heel had left a blemish on the empire's record of conquest. But beyond retribution, there was a strategic necessity. Greece remained a potential foothold for rebellion within the empire. The Ionian revolt had proven that the region could not be ignored. If left unchecked, it could threaten the stability of Persian rule in the western satrapies. When the two leaders finally confronted one another, it was not as equals. Xerxes had every advantage: numbers, resources, and the backing of an empire spanning from Egypt to the Industry. Leonidas had a single pass and a force that, by all reasonable calculations, could not hold for long. Yet, for the Spartan king, retreat was never an option. He had been raised in a world where battle was duty, where death in service to the polis was not a sacrifice, but an expectation. His defiance was not born of recklessness, but of the rigid laws that governed Spartan existence. Xerxes, for all his might, understood the cost of war. He was no mindless conqueror. He sought to avoid unnecessary bloodshed. Before the battle began, he sent envoys, offering Leonidas a chance to surrender. The Spartan king's response was curt: "Molin Labe, come and take them." The stage was set. One man led an empire, the other a city. One sought dominion, the other defiance. Thermopylae would be their battlefield. The Greek force at Thermopylae was a coalition army, but its backbone was the Spartan hoplite. Each of these warriors was armed with a bronze-faced shield, a thrusting spear, and a short sword for close combat. Their armor, bronze helmets, cuirasses, and greaves, was designed for protection and endurance in prolonged engagements. They fought in the phalanx, a dense, disciplined formation where each man's shield protected not only himself but the warrior to his left. It was a system perfected over centuries of inter-Greek warfare, emphasizing cohesion and relentless forward pressure. But the Spartans were not alone. Alongside them stood contingents from other Greek city-states. The Thespians, led by Thermopylae, contributed 700 men, choosing to stand alongside the Spartans even when retreat was still an option. The Thebans, brought by Leonidas, were a more reluctant presence. Some suspected they were only there to prove their loyalty to the Greek cause. Additional forces from Corinth, Phocis, and other regions bolstered the ranks, though the total number of defenders barely exceeded 7,000. Their enemy was unlike anything they had faced before. The Persian army was a vast, multi-ethnic force drawn from the far reaches of the empire. It included Medes, Assyrians, Indians, Bactrians, and Scythians, each with their own weapons and fighting styles. At its core was the Persian Sparabera, infantry who carried large wicker shields and short spears, relying on mobility and massed formations. Behind them stood ranks of archers, whose composite bows could fire with deadly accuracy. The elite of Xerxes' army were the Immortals, a 10,000-strong corps of highly trained Persian warriors. Identifiable by their scale armor and distinctive tiaras, they fought as heavy infantry, wielding spears and daggers. Unlike Greek hoplites, they relied on speed and agility rather than brute force, using their shields and weapons to overwhelm enemies through rapid, coordinated strikes. Cavalry played a central role in Persian warfare, though it was rendered ineffective at Thermopylae. Persian horsemen, accustomed to sweeping charges on open terrain, found themselves unable to maneuver in the narrow pass. Their speed and archery, usually devastating against less armored foes, had no effect against a wall of locked shields. What the Persian army lacked in armor and discipline, it made up for in sheer numbers. The Greeks would face attack after attack, with new units continuously cycling into battle. In open terrain, the Persian forces would have crushed any resistance through sheer attrition. But Thermopylae was no ordinary battlefield. Here, in the confined space between mountain and sea, Greek hoplites and Persian Sparabera would clash in brutal, relentless combat, with neither side willing to yield. For days, the Greeks watched from behind their phalanx as the Persian army gathered beyond the pass. Then, on the morning of the first assault, the silence broke. Thousands of Persian infantry surged forward, the front ranks colliding against a wall of shields and bronze. The first wave consisted of Medes and Scythians, light infantry better suited for open combat than for the crushing confines of Thermopylae. They carried short spears and wicker shields, weapons ill-equipped to break a Greek phalanx. At Leonidas' command, the hoplites stood firm, spears angled forward, shields locked in place. As the Persians advanced, they encountered an unmovable line of interlocked shields, each warrior pushing forward with disciplined precision. The Greek doru, a long thrusting spear, reached farther than the Persian weapons, striking before the enemy could retaliate. The first wave faltered. Pressed forward by those behind them, Persian troops found themselves impaled on Greek spears, unable to break the formation before being forced back. For hours, wave after wave attempted to breach the phalanx. The Greeks, fighting in shifts, repelled each assault, conserving their strength while the Persians exhausted themselves in futile charges. By midday, the pass was littered with bodies, the narrow terrain now an advantage to the defenders. Dead Persians piled upon one another, making movement even more difficult. Xerxes, observing the failure of his infantry, sent in the Immortals, his elite warriors. These were not levied conscripts but professional soldiers, armored in scale and wielding shorter spears and daggers. But the same constraints applied. The pass allowed only a few to engage at a time. The Immortals fought with precision, adapting to Greek tactics, but the hoplites held firm. At one point, the Spartans feigned retreat, luring the enemy forward, only to turn and strike with brutal efficiency. The second day brought more of the same. The Persians attempted to overwhelm the defenders with sheer force, but the Greeks remained entrenched. Casualties mounted, and the morale of the Persian troops began to waver. Xerxes grew impatient. This was not how the invasion was supposed to unfold. Then, the tide turned. A local man, Ephialtes, came before the Persian camp with a proposal. He knew of a path through the mountains, a narrow trail leading behind Greek lines. That night, Hydarnes, commander of the Immortals, took a detachment and ascended the Anapaea path. By dawn, the Greek sentries posted in the hills saw them coming, but it was too late. The defenders abandoned their position, retreating to warn Leonidas. The Spartan king understood what was about to happen. Encirclement meant annihilation. He ordered the remaining Greek forces to withdraw while he and his chosen few remained behind. The Thespians refused to leave, choosing instead to fight alongside the Spartans, knowing their fate was sealed. The Thebans, on the other hand, stayed reluctantly. When the battle was lost, they surrendered. On the final morning, the Greeks prepared for death. With their flanks now exposed, the Persian advance was no longer confined to the pass. Surrounded, the Spartans and Thespians fought on, wielding broken spears and short swords, cutting through enemy ranks before being overwhelmed. The last of them fell atop a small hill, where their bodies formed a final barricade. By mid-morning, the battle was over. Xerxes stood among the dead, surveying the battlefield. When he found the body of Leonidas, he ordered it beheaded and placed on a stake, a rare act of vengeance for the Persian king, who normally honored fallen foes. But this was not an ordinary enemy, nor an ordinary battle. Thermopylae was no victory for the Greeks, but it was not a victory Xerxes would soon forget. The Persian army, now unopposed at Thermopylae, continued its march south. The road to central Greece lay open. One by one, cities submitted, offering earth and water as tokens of surrender. Athens, however, refused. Themistocles, the Athenian statesman, had already evacuated the city, sending its population to the nearby island of Salamis. When the Persians arrived, they found Athens deserted. In retaliation, Xerxes ordered it burned. The Acropolis was set ablaze, its temples reduced to ruins. But the Greek resistance was far from over. Thermopylae had not been a victory, but it had not been meaningless. The delay, however brief, had bought time for the Greek fleet at Artemision. Themistocles had used this time to consolidate his forces, luring the Persian navy into the narrow straits of Salamis. It was there, in a confined battlefield much like Thermopylae, that the Greek fleet shattered the Persian armada. Deprived of naval support, Xerxes realized that his position in Greece was no longer tenable. He withdrew the bulk of his army, leaving behind a force under Mardonios to finish the campaign. A year later, at Plataea, that force was annihilated, and with it, Persia's ambitions in mainland Greece came to an end. In Sparta, the fallen were honored as heroes. The 300 became legend, their sacrifice immortalized in poetry and oratory. A simple stone was placed at the site of their last stand, bearing the words of the poet Simonides. "Stranger, tell the Lacedaemonians that we lie here, obedient to their laws." The inscription was not just a tribute, but a declaration. Sparta's laws demanded discipline, duty, and sacrifice. Leonidas and his men had upheld those laws to the very end. Over time, the battle took on a greater meaning. To the Greeks, it became proof that courage and unity could stand against overwhelming force. To later generations, it was a lesson in defiance, a reminder that war is not always measured in victories, but in the will to resist. The name Thermopylae would never be forgotten. It would echo in military academies and speeches, and in the minds of those who saw in its defenders not just warriors, but an ideal, one that long outlived the men who had fought and died there. In the broader scope of history, Thermopylae became a paradigm of military sacrifice. It was the embodiment of the laconic ideal, discipline, duty, and an unwavering commitment to the state. It was a battle that demonstrated the power of strategy over sheer numbers and how terrain could shape the course of war. But above all, it was an assertion of identity. The Greeks did not fight merely for survival. They fought to define who they were, and who they refused to become. Hi there, I'm Kyle, the host of History of Human Evolution, with a PhD in history and a love for storytelling. I'm here to guide you through the fascinating journey of our species. If you like to explore the past, hit that subscribe button, like this video, and share your thoughts below.